Okay, so I'd like to talk about this project, this research project, which Divine Word University has been involved in over the last 2 years. And we finally produced a report, and we've got some further follow-up work to do. And I'd like to let you know about this research that we engaged in. So it's about SARV, SARV, Sorcery Accusation Related Violence. It's a complex issue. The A is very important. The accusation related violence is important because we're not talking about sorcery violence, we're talking about sorcery accusation related violence. And it's a complex issue right throughout Papua New Guinea, and it's not just in Papua New Guinea. There's also a lot of instances of it in other parts of the world, particularly in India and in parts of Africa, where there are a lot of cases of sorcery accusation related violence. Generally, it involves misinformation and fear-based narratives that fuel violence, and I'll be talking a little bit more about these narratives. It also involves limited access to justice for those who are accused. Once you're accused, often there's nothing much you can do. You're just part of something that you're powerless in and that you have no control over. Now, the Papua New Guinea government has responded by repealing the Sorcery Act of 1971, and they added Section 299A to the criminal code, which means that people who involved in this sort of accusation-related violence can be convicted according to the criminal code, not according to the Sorcery Act. And also recently, 2 years ago, they passed the Glassman Act. And the Glassman Act is for a person who directly or indirectly pretends to be, holds themselves out to be, or professes to be a glassman or glassmary, is guilty of a crime. And we've had a couple of cases recently where people have been convicted, one in Ley recently, where a woman was killed after being accused, and then they then convicted the glassman, in that case where this person had pretended to be a glassman, to be able to say that this person was a sorcerer. Now, following the deaths of Leniata Kipari in Mount Hagen and Helen Rumbali in Bougainville, there was a lot of interest in the academic circles, but also in the press about this issue. And so myself, together with Miranda Forsyth, Professor Miranda Forsyth from ANU, were involved in that research, and we involved Maria Sagrista, who was a filmmaker here with the CA department here, and also Fidelma Takaili was our data entry person. Are you here, Fidelma? Where are you? She's not here. Yeah, okay. Fidelma, there you are. You were our data person. You filled a whole 4 trays with data over that research. And we produced a film called Everybody's Business, and you can find that film on YouTube, and a number of people have seen that. There's long versions and short versions of that film, trying to show how the survivors that we encountered are human beings, and their human needs and the human suffering that they encounter as a result of being accused. But then later, in 2023, the university again became involved with Vice President Pamela Kamya and Leanne and Dr. Cliff Kiru here from this university, together with the National Research Institute, and we've got William here today from NRI, and the Australian National University as advisors. We got involved in another research which I want to speak about today. And this was supported by the United Nations Population Fund and by COICA, by the Korean development agency. Ethics was approved and the field research began in 2024. So there were 7 participatory workshops around the highlands. Eastern Highlands, Jimbu, Jiwaka, Western Highlands, Enga, Southern Highlands, and Hela. There were 1 week-long workshops in those provinces, in the 7 highlands provinces. We decided to focus on the highlands provinces at that stage, thinking that it had particular characteristics as SARV in the highlands provinces. At least that's what we were hearing from the media. And for example, here's a picture of the group that we had in Wabeg. You can see there, yeah, whoops. See if this thing will go back. No, it goes back all the way. You've got Cliff Kiru there. Yeah, you've got the bishop here. Here's one of the survivors. She's someone who was accused and tortured, and she was telling us her story there. I happened to be there. And there's a lot of people representing, for example, the police and the government and health department and so on. So those were the workshops that we had, 7 of them throughout the highlands. And these were the basic questions we were asking. Who's involved in a typical SARV case and why? What are the current driving factors? How's the situation changing? Who's involved as actors in responding to SARV in the province and why? And what are the identified strategies that are working and what are the identified strategies that are not working? There's a lot of people trying to do something and some things seem to be working and some not. And what can be recommended for future action based on our learning? These were the questions that we were asking for the research. And so after a lot of difficulty, I might say, we managed to come up with a report. And it's this report here. It's over 100 pages, this report. And we call it No One Should Stand Alone, Towards a Unified Response to Sorcery Accusation Related Violence. So just to summarize a few of the points that are coming out from this report, what did we find? First of all, that SARV is widespread in the highlands area that we were researching, but it's quite uneven. It's not the same within a province or between provinces. For example, if you go to the Eastern Highlands province, you'll find it's very different in the eastern side of the Eastern Highlands province, where it's sort of like called poison and it affects men, whereas the western side of the Eastern Highlands, it's more affecting women and it's more the Sanguma type of accusation. And the same's happening around other provinces as well. In Enga, you've got differences between the east and the west. In Hela, you've got big differences, especially if you want to go down to the Hewa area of the Hela province, where there's a lot of accusation-related violence there, whereas around Tari, not so much. They're more interested in fighting one another, it seems, and they don't have much time for sorcery accusations. So it varies between provinces and it varies within provinces. And that's important because sometimes people will make generalizations, especially in the press. You know, there's that Highlands, they're into SARV, sorcery accusation. Well, you can't make generalizations like that, which are really truthful. And it's dangerous to mask these significant differences by just making the generalizations. Now, we also found that belief systems and narratives about sorcery vary and are changing. There's 2 main narratives. One narrative is about a cannibalistic spirit beliefs, and it goes by the local names of Kumo or Gumu, in Enga Yamaneng, in the Hewa, Pisai Mai, and this is usually some sort of accusation of someone that eats bodies, eats hearts. It's the reason why some people were checking at the cemeteries, House Matmat, nogorol old sangumi like kagem kissing body parts belong money diapanish and this sort of thing. So there's this cannibalistic spirit belief. And I remember talking to some people who claimed to be sangumas, and they were saying how they used to go to the mountain at Schwabe. What's that big mountain at Schwabe? Elimbari, yeah? Elimbari, that's the Parliament Blongo witches, and they go there at night to discuss what body parts they're going to get, you know, this sort of thing. Okay, the other one is more the object and ritual-based sorcery beliefs, which one would talk about poison, trumbol, assault sorcery, you know, the sort of thing that you hear more from the Sepik, for example, that assault sorcery where someone becomes unconscious and then they take out parts and put in grass and stitch them up again, that sort of, you know, narrative. Well, you've got that as well, and it also, you find that more on the eastern part of the Highlands and some other parts as well. So you've got these differences, these different narratives that are changing as well. Yeah, they're both historical and they're contemporary. Now, what's happening with all of this is also quite complex. I've got a graph here, and you can see that top line is of the number of convictions of men, and the bottom line is the number of convictions of women. Now, women are by far the greatest number who are accused are women. But you can see that by far the greater number of convictions are for the accusation of men. So if you're a male, it's much more likely they're going to take you to court, take your accusers to court. You've got much more likelihood than that. If you're a woman, it's not going to really work. And I've been in situations where women have tried to take it to court, and it's almost impossible because for example, they've got to have witnesses, so they've got to hire a bus to bring the witnesses into the court, and then they've got to feed them, and then when they get to the court they find that it's adjourned until next week, so they send the bus back again, and they're told to come back again next week, and it all costs a lot of money, and this is for someone that's been accused and tortured. Usually unless they've got a very supportive person helping them, it's just too much. Yeah. But it seems that with men, it's more likely that you can get that support, and that you can see the convictions here, the rates here for male and female. It also differs amongst the provinces. Now, I've got a scale up here. It's probably rather small, but it starts with Chimbu at the top there, and there's only one conviction for Chimbu. It comes down Southern Highlands, Enga, and so on. But it's the numbers provinces which have more convictions, like West New Britain, Madang, Oro, Eastern Highlands and Morobe. They're the ones at the bottom which have more convictions. Now, why would that be? We don't really know, but one reason is if you're up in Enga and you try to convict someone and you put him in jail, all his brothers are going to be onto you. You're not safe anymore because you put their brother into jail. And so it's very, very difficult to accuse and then convict someone and to actually get and follow it up to actually convict someone in some of these provinces. So there's cultural reasons, not just legal reasons, why some of these figures are like this. Okay, so what are some of the triggers and the progression of cases? The cases generally follow a similar pattern. In every province, they follow a similar pattern. Usually it follows a sudden death, and after that sudden death, there'll be social suspicion, and then confirmation by perhaps a glassman or a glassmary or a prayer warrior, someone like that. And then and funerals are the key sites where these accusations will emerge or intensify. So often misfortune such as illness or disability or accidents or economic hardship can be trigger situations. That triggers it, and then there's the accusation. If the community gets behind it, then it gets out of control. The only one that's going to stop it is going to be a recognized leader in the community, if they're brave enough and strong enough. Otherwise, it could be that the police are called, if they would be able to come. And it can end either very often in the torture of a person who might die, or be rescued, or run away. There's a lot of, it's very difficult for someone to go back into a community after they've been accused. Now, what are the characteristics of these victims and the survivors? And you can see it varies throughout the whole of Papua New Guinea. Here you've got the first one, Hela, Enga, and Western Highlands, and then Chimbu, and then Gulf, and so on, through to Manus. Now you can see that in Hela, the only victims are all women. And it's very strong in Enga, it's very strong in the Western Highlands, but not so strong. The blue is for the male victims, and the orange is for the female victims. You can see the variance in trends through Papua New Guinea, across the different provinces, how it differs for whether it's male or female who are the victims of sorcery accusation related violence. And that needs to be taken into account too, for people who are wanting to try to counter this or do something about it, to realize the sorts of characteristics that you have. The biggest numbers that we got were from the Southern Highlands. We got incredible numbers, like over 100 a year cases in the Southern Highlands at the moment. Not so many cases in some of the other places, but it depended on gender, on relationships, on social marginality, economic factors. There are secondary victims. What about the children? What about the children who see their mother being tortured naked? You know? And the stigma associated with it is very, very important. Okay, so the perpetrators, who are they? Well, it's not just the people that are doing the torture, because it's the whole community in a way. Now, this is a picture of Christina. Christina was in the Southern Highlands. This was happening in Mendi. I've actually written a whole book about Christina. I knew her quite well. She's died now, but there's a book that I've written about Christina, and she was telling me, you know, she's blindfolded there, but she knew everyone that was torturing her by their voices. She knew who they were, even though she was blindfolded. And she knew who these ones were that were torturing her. But it's not just that, it's also the enablers, who are the leaders in the community, but also the what we call the structures of complicity, the other people who are prepared to just look, you know, and do nothing about it. And some people are afraid to do something because they know that they will be accused themselves. But there's other people who have enough influence in the community who could perhaps do something about it, who still are just enablers by being there in a complicit way. So that there's that broader structural failure to intervene for various reasons. That silence, that passive agreement of all those people there that are there watching that case. And that went on for a couple of days there with Christina there in Mendi. Yeah. The hot irons are being heated up in the fire, and then she's being tortured with the hot irons that are in the fire there. Yeah. And she knew everyone that she was tortured by. Yeah. It makes it even worse when someone knows that it's their own family members who are doing it. Yeah. And there are cases where, for instance, a husband has agreed to the torture of his wife, and she realizes that it's her husband who's egging people on to actually torture her. That has more psychological pain than the physical pain when someone like that does it. Okay, so what's changing? You see that picture of Christina. That's a typical picture of the way things happen, and it happened again this year with the woman in Margarima this year. We had that case. Eventually she was shot, and she fell into the river after she was shot, but she was tortured for 2 days there. Yeah. So what's changing? First of all is the nature of the violence. The nature of the violence seems to be becoming more graphic, more sexualized, with the mutilation and burning of genitals. There are emerging class of victims of people who have assets, businessmen, people motivated by desire for those assets and jealousy that they've got. They've got land and they've got coffee plantations and so on. It has been monetized, and this is affecting things now. What's also influencing things is the fact that it's going on Facebook and WhatsApp, and you can see sometimes people are filming this and then they put it on WhatsApp, they put it on Facebook. Now, that's something that's more recent, that's something more new, and it's both causing greater shame for the person who is they're being seen in public that way, but it's also spreading ideas to other young people who could be perpetrators. This is what happens, this is what you do. Yeah. And also it seems to be involving youth gangs too, who define their identity by their names. For example, the One Mind group in Hela. The One Mind group of youth have been involved in these things, or Youth Power in Goroka, if anyone's heard of Youth Power in Goroka. So they form together in different groups with an identity, and then get involved in this sort of violence. Now, one of the problems is that the data is really fragmented. There's no formal system within the police or the health department that can give you records to tag or code cases in SARV-related incidents. There's nowhere. We tried to find out in the different provinces, going to the hospital, going to the police, and the closest we could get was some of the church records, particularly in the Southern Highlands with Sister Lorena, but in Enga with Bishop Justin. Bishop Justin will be here in 10 days' time. He's our bishop for the missioning, and he's a very well-known person in this area, and he's been collecting data. And there's no standard reporting form, so data sets can't be compared. You've got some data coming from one province, some data coming from another province, and it's very hard to compare how they can be brought together. So some places there are some helpful things happening. For instance, I've got a picture here from some local activists in Enga enacting a drama to show how SARV victims are protected by the criminal law, by the Constitution, by UN Human Rights Framework, and so on. So the Enga, they're taking a perpetrator-centered approach. In other words, the bishop, who we'll see in 2 weeks' time, and his people working with him, they're not going to the victims, they're going to the perpetrators. Who are the ones who are likely perpetrators? These usually groups of young men. And let's try to talk with them, and let's try to get them actively involved in projects which will help them to get a positive view of life. For instance, helping them to start chicken projects, helping them to start little businesses, helping them to start other ventures as potential perpetrators. And some of them had names, which would lead you to think that they're getting all ready for violence, but to actually go to them and to try to get them to form into a group that could be, in fact, opposing this sort of thing. So that's the approach of the bishop at Enga. It seems to be working to some extent. Another way is through IPOs and POs, preventative orders, and safe houses is another way. But safe houses are difficult because how long is a person going to stay in a safe house? They come, and then where do they go after that? So you've got people who, you know, stay in a safe house for 3 months, 6 months, have nowhere to go, and then you're left up. The person who's running the safe house has got all the expenses of trying to look after a person, often with their children, and then the children want to go to school. Where are the school fees going to come from? The uniform's going to come from? And you've offered them hospitality, but you know, there's a lot of additional expenses that occur with that. So safe houses is an important function, but it can be very expensive, and it has to be better managed. Intervention during funerals. That's the approach was taken by the bishop in Chimbu, that trying to intervene and have the right people go along to attend funerals, so that if talk starts about Sanguma, that they try to change the topic, and to try to, if it's a Catholic group, to try to make it into a religious funeral where prayer will be involved, rather than talking about the narratives of Sanguma. Yeah. There's also a legal desk that started in Chimbu, where people are able to come to get legal advice, and there have been some lawyers who are part of the legal desk in an office set up by the diocese in Kundiawa, with mixed success. So there's different ways that people are trying to do to respond in a positive way, but it's piecemeal. You know, one group is trying to do it, another group's trying to do it, but as a united approach, we don't see that. And so from this report, we're proposing that there needs to be a move from awareness to transformation, that there has to be a change, there has to be a transformation. And so we need networks. We need a transformative potential of different actors and groups and organizations who can work together, and incentives are needed for the different groups to work together. And this is our message to the government and to people like that. We've got to find ways to work together and to provide those incentives. Donors can help or hinder in this regard, you know, because they can give some money, but then the money dries up, and then the group who's dependent on money, they don't work anymore. So the revised NAP, National Action Plan, SARV National Action Plan, needs a committed core committee and a dedicated coordinator. That's one of our recommendations to the government. I can just read here: the lack of coordination, both horizontally across the different organizations working in the area and vertically through the different layers of government, is the single largest problem in the response today. Now, what we find is that if there's going to be any change, it has to happen at a community level. Some communities are actively addressing it, maybe through community bylaws. You know, around Jiwaka, some of the communities there are establishing bylaws within the community and then enforcing those bylaws, and that seems to be helping in some places. But it needs to be supported. There's other programs supporting communities and addressing SARV that are being trialled in different parts. And one of the examples of this would be in the, I'll be speaking about a little bit further on, the community curriculum, which we've developed, which Divine Word University has sponsored to develop. It's a 120-page curriculum here to be able to work with communities, the community curriculum. Here you see a picture of Evelyn Kunda. She was here earlier this year at Divine Word with the lecturer from Goroka University. Yeah, and Evelyn is doing a lot of work there in Goroka. We have to realize too that SARV is different to GBV. There's a connection between them, sure, but just to think that SARV is one part of GBV is downplays SARV too much. This SARV is so particular and important and serious that it has to be considered on its own, not just simply as a form of GBV. It's related, definitely, and people who are working in the area of GBV, hopefully they'll find a place for considering SARV. But SARV is more collective. It's more public. You've got that public violence where you can have someone stripped and being tortured in front of 500 people, you know. That's not GBV, that's SARV. Yeah. You've got a wide range of victims, including men and boys. Now you can see from some of these statistics I put up here, in some provinces, it's not women who are accused and tortured, it's men. And Professor Kuzma the other day was telling me how he's just been trying to sew up the hands of a man who lost both his hands here in Madang by being accused of being a sorcerer. And they cut his hands off, a man. So it differs throughout the whole of Papua New Guinea. If you're in Bougainville, it's men who are accused, not women. So the harm suffered by SARV victims is catastrophically severe. You know, with GBV, people do get beaten up and sometimes they get killed, admittedly. But more likely, a SARV victim will get killed. And if you see the terrible injuries, both physically and psychologically, in these people, it's catastrophic, especially with their families as well. So the care and repatriation of SARV victims can involve entire families or communities, and it requires years to be able to deal with it. It's not just a matter of one person being able to go to a counsellor and to get help from a counsellor because of GBV, but this is something that's often far greater and more catastrophic than that. So you've got a picture there of survivors being cared for by a committed individual. That's in Layagam. That's Peter Pumbu, and he's got some women there who are who are there with him, and they've been there for about a year. I got an email from him yesterday, Peter there, and he's trying to get one of them to Lay, and he's asking me to help him with a bus fare to get one of these women to Lay to join her family there, where she feels she can be more established there. Now, we find that the current emphasis on the response to SARV needs to be flipped. Instead of 80% of resources going into a response, we need, and 20% into prevention, we need 80% going into prevention and only 20% into the response. Now I'll just read those things up here. You see, if you look at the response, you've got the rescue of a person, you've got the police, you've got the hospital, they'll probably end up in hospital, you've got the law and justice section, you've got counselling, you've got the safe house, and you've got possible reintegration of the person. So that's the response. But what about the proactive, the prevention? Telling a new story, changing the narrative, yeah. Education, thinking critically, preparation, getting help. These are the sorts of things that we need more attention on, so that hopefully that actual moment won't happen where that person is attacked and experiences that violence, and then we have to go into all of this as a result. So what we're saying is that we would like to see more proactive work rather than reactive. And also we need a holistic government response that involves education. It has to go into the school curriculum. Who's going to do that? Well, Divinewood University's got teachers' colleges. Maybe that's somewhere where we can start with our teachers' colleges. Health, making care health workers a part of the fight. We're running 2 medical schools. We're running a medical school and 2 nursing schools. Good place to start. Legally, for paralegal services. Survivor-centered coordination data system. Programs to work with would-be perpetrators and care for survivors and hearing their voice. And I've got a picture there of Peter and Grace. Peter and Grace is a series of books and lessons that we worked out with the help of Anton Lutz, who's an amazing fellow, to use in schools. Peter and Grace, to try to help young people to be more aware and to have a healthy approach to this issue. I've been trying to do a bit myself. It's me on the parliamentary committee with Ruth Gisam. In the parliamentary committee, okay, they're at the top there, and they can be controlling some of the funding, which is probably good, but it's basically going to have to be solved at the grassroots level, at the community level. As the Bishop of Enga said, SARV will stop when all the when all the communities in Enga say SARV will stop. That's when it will stop. When all the communities decide it will stop. Other than that, it won't stop. Yeah. Also, I've been trying to circulate the report. You can see the Antonio Guterres, the Secretary of the United Nations there. He's holding the two reports that I'd given him, and he said he would take them back to the UN. I don't know what's happened to them now after that, but he was very thankful to receive the reports. And we're trying to operate at that level, not only at the community level, which is so important, but to operate at the higher levels as well. And so we've developed this community curriculum, and this is basically the cover page of it, and it's about communities united against SARV. It's a community curriculum, and it's based on the image of a garden. A good garden and a garden that's no good. A garden that's going to bear good fruit and a garden that's not. And so the 7 sections of the curriculum are these. Understanding SARV. Secondly, human rights and legal literacy. 3, community empowerment. 4, conflict resolution and mediation. 5, care for survivors. 6, youth leadership. And 7, faith-based engagement. So they're the sections of the curriculum that we've developed, and it's been trialled in Enga, and it was, I think, quite successful there. The people who underwent it over 8 weeks seemed to have a real change of heart, and were definitely willing to oppose SARV after having gone through this. And we're taking it on and trying to trial it now, starting in about 2 weeks' time in Chimbu, through Mengende and Chimbu, and to be able to trial that for about 8 weeks in Chimbu, and gradually, hopefully, through all of the Highlands provinces. And it all needs to be monitored as a good research project. It needs to be monitored the way it's going, and to be able to make decisions on where to go from there. So, it being 12 minutes past 1, I think I've spoken enough, and I'd just like to say thank you for being such an attentive audience, and I'd like to just give you a moment to think about some of the things I've been talking about, and I'd be happy to answer any comments or questions that you might have in the last 15 minutes.